Okay, so you guys wanted us to take a deep dive into the Diane O'Dell case. And
Right.
I have to say, this is a really wild one.
It is.
We've got everything for this deep dive. Court documents, news articles, encyclopedia entries, you name it.
Yeah, we went deep.
It's a lot.
It's going to stay with you.
It's going to stay with you. So just to get everyone up to speed, we're looking at Diane O'Dell, an American woman who was convicted of murdering 3 of her 12 children.
12 children.
Yeah, 12.
Okay.
And here's the really disturbing part. She traveled with their bodies for years.
Years.
Hidden in storage units. I mean, how do we even begin to unpack this?
It's definitely a case that I think, makes you question everything you think you know about, like, human behavior and what people are capable of.
Yeah.
So maybe we can start with the timeline. These crimes took place between 1981 and 1984.
Okay.
So we're looking at, several years.
Wow.
And then fast forward all the way to 2003. That's when it all came to light in Safford, Arizona.
Yeah.
A storage unit was abandoned.
Oh, wow.
And, well, you can imagine the shock when they opened it up and found the remains of 3 infants.
I can't even imagine. This storage unit, it wasn't just the bodies, though, right? There was other stuff in there, too. Personal belongings, things like that. What does that tell us, do you think, about Diane's mindset during all of this?
That's what's so fascinating. To have those items, those personal belongings right there with the bodies,
Yeah.
it really suggests like a whole, I don't know, a really complex psychological situation, Like, was it denial? Or maybe she just couldn't let go? I mean, it's really a question that I think forensic psychologists are still kind of debating.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Okay, so 2003, the storage unit, the discovery. What happened next?
So they caught up with O'Dell
Okay.
May 17th, 2003.
Gotcha.
And, of course, there's an investigation. And she claims that the babies died at birth.
Okay.
But the prosecution, they're pushing for second-degree murder.
Second-degree murder. Before we go into what exactly that means, legally, I'm kind of curious about the investigation itself. What do the sources say about that? Like, were there any red flags, anything missed along the way that, maybe could have changed things?
That's such an important question. And honestly, it comes up a lot in cases like this, doesn't it?
It does.
The sources, they mostly just focus on the trial and how shocking the crime was. But, when you really look closely, there are these little hints
Okay.
that maybe, just maybe, there were opportunities for someone to step in.
Okay.
Remember, we're talking about 12 children here.
Right.
So let's dig into that a bit. What do the sources tell us about Diane's relationships, her support system? Were there signs that, someone maybe should have picked up on?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to the trial.
Right.
She admitted to causing the deaths, but she was convicted of second-degree murder.
Right.
What were the main arguments that that came out at the trial?
Well, the prosecution, they argued pretty successfully that even though the killings, maybe weren't planned out in advance,
Okay.
she acted with, I guess you could say, like a depraved indifference to human life.
Oh, wow.
But the defense, they presented her as a woman who was just completely overwhelmed by her circumstances, abandoned by the fathers of her children, no support system.
Gosh, it makes you think. How much did societal pressures or the lack of support really play a role in all of this? I mean, are we looking at a personal failing here or, a systemic one?
I think that's one of the, honestly, like the most difficult parts of this whole case.
Yeah.
It forces you to really confront just how complicated human behavior is, especially within a certain societal context.
Yeah.
The sources show that O'Dell was a single mother at a time when, well, society wasn't exactly kind to single mothers.
Right.
Especially those with children born outside of marriage.
It was a very different time.
Very different.
Okay, so the jury finds her guilty of second-degree murder. What was the sentence, and where is she now?
Life in prison.
Wow.
And she's currently incarcerated, but she could be eligible for parole in 2029.
2029, that's not actually that far away.
No.
This brings us to something that's been kind of, in the back of my mind this whole time. The case, it's often called the babies in boxes case.
Right.
You think that nickname, that label, has shaped how people see the case?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's a tough one, I mean, sure, labels like that, they make a case stick in your memory.
Right.
But they can also kind of overshadow the human side of things.
Absolutely.
We're talking about 3 individual lives here, tragically cut short.
Yeah.
Not just some sensational headline.
You're right. We can't lose sight of that.
Right.
Okay, but what about Diane herself? Did she ever, try to explain her actions? Why did she do it?
She did. According to O'Dell, she felt overwhelmed, like completely unable to care for those infants.
Okay.
She said the fathers abandoned her, and she didn't see any other way out.
So how much of her explanation should we take, at face value? Is it really, desperation, or is it a way to, I don't know, lessen her guilt?
It's so hard to say, for
Hmm.
sure. And I think that ambiguity, that's part of what makes this whole case so fascinating, but also so disturbing, you know, because it makes us confront the limits of what we can really understand about why people do the things they do, especially under extreme pressure.
And you have to wonder, what was going through her mind all those years? Carrying that burden, literally and figuratively.
Oh, absolutely. The psychological impact of keeping a secret like that for so long, that's huge.
Yeah.
It raises so many questions about her state of mind, not just when the crimes happened, but in the years that followed.
We've talked about the societal pressures, but what about her own personal life? The sources, they mentioned she had 12 children in total.
Yeah.
What about her family history? Is there anything in her past that might, help us understand what happened?
Honestly, that's where things get kind of murky. Our sources, they mainly focus on the legal stuff,
Okay.
details about Odell's personal life. They're pretty scarce, and that makes it tough to really grasp the context, like what led to these events.
So we're left with more questions than answers.
It seems that way, yeah.
I guess that's how it goes sometimes, especially with cases like this.
It often does, unfortunately. It's true, it is frustrating. Like trying to put together a puzzle, and you're missing half the pieces.
Right. We keep coming back to all these unknowns. And
Yeah.
we've been talking a lot about Diane, but what about the victims? What do we actually know about those babies?
Not a whole lot, sadly. We know roughly how old they were, thanks to forensic analysis.
Okay.
But their identities, that remains a mystery. And I think that, that just makes it all the more tragic. It really drives home that these were real lives, each with their own, potential, their own story cut short.
It's heartbreaking, and it makes you wonder about the surviving children. How to even begin to process something like that, finding out your own mother is responsible for the deaths of your siblings.
It's hard to imagine the impact on those kids. The psychological ramifications, they must be profound. And it just shows how these crimes, they had this ripple effect. The trauma, it spreads out.
Yeah.
It goes way beyond the immediate victims. It affects families, communities, even the people involved in the investigation and the prosecution. It touches everyone.
It touched on the social context earlier, but I want to go a little deeper. Back in the early 80s, what was the understanding of, say, postpartum depression? Was there even awareness of it?
That's such a critical point. Back then, awareness of postpartum depression, it was a lot less common than it is now. There was a lot of stigma surrounding it, and resources for mothers who were struggling, they were scarce.
So, is it possible that Diane was dealing with postpartum depression, maybe undiagnosed or untreated, and that somehow contributed to what she did?
It's definitely a possibility. We can't really diagnose someone retrospectively, but I think we have to acknowledge that mental health can play a huge role in cases like this.
It makes me think about how much forensic science and criminal profiling have evolved over time. If this happened today, I mean, how different would the investigation, even the prosecution, look?
It's an interesting thought experiment, with all the advancements in DNA technology, forensic psychology, even just criminal profiling in general. I think investigators would have a much deeper understanding of the crime scene itself and the perpetrator's motivations.
So you're saying with today's technology, she probably wouldn't have been able to keep those bodies hidden for so long?
It would have been a lot harder, for sure. Forensics have come a long way. Concealing evidence is a lot tougher now.
Right.
And then you've got databases, digital footprints. I think the investigation would have moved a lot faster.
It makes you wonder if she ever, I don't know, if she planned to get caught. Like, was abandoning that storage unit, was that a cry for help? Or was it just, a practical thing? She couldn't pay for it anymore, so.
That's a question only Diane O'Dell can answer, and I think is part of what makes this case so intriguing.
Right.
All these years later, those basic questions, they're still unanswered.
Yeah, there's so much we don't know. We've talked about the legal and the forensic side of things, but there's also the ethical dimension.
Absolutely.
This case, it raises some really uncomfortable questions
It does.
about what it means to be a mother, the limits of personal responsibility, and even society's role in preventing these kinds of tragedies. Like, does the possibility that she had postpartum depression, does that change how we see her? Does it make her action less horrific, or does it just add another layer to an already really complicated case?
Those are tough questions. There are no easy answers. I think it's a moral and ethical dilemma that everyone has to grapple with on their own.
Yeah, and it's even more complex when you remember that she wasn't, a stranger to motherhood. She had other children experience raising infants.
Exactly. That's what makes this case so different from a lot of other infanticide cases. It wasn't a lack of experience or understanding of what it takes to be a mother. There was something else going on. And that's what we're trying to figure out.
How does she, like, compartmentalize all of that? I mean, how do you reconcile those horrific acts with being a mother to your other children?
It's a level of compartmentalization that's really hard to grasp,
Yes.
and it makes you think about dissociation, denial, the way humans can box away trauma. It's fascinating, but also really disturbing.
It's clear this case is about so much more than just the crimes themselves. It's a look into human behavior, how our social systems fail, and the ethical dilemmas we face when trying to make sense of something that just doesn't make sense. We've gone over so much in this deep dive, the timeline, the investigation, the societal context, the psychological piece of it all. But before we finish up, there's something that's been kind of sticking with me throughout all
Oh,
this,
yeah?
this whole idea of justice. Like, what does justice even look like in a case as complex as this?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I don't think there's an easy answer. Is it punishment, rehabilitation, or is it something else altogether?
Diane O'Dell got a life sentence with a chance of parole in 2029.
Right.
But, I mean, does that really address what happened? Does it give any kind of closure to the families of the victims or even to society as a whole?
I think we have to remember that no matter what the legal outcome is, it can't truly fix the harm that was done. Those 3 lives are gone, and the trauma that the surviving family members carry, that's something you can't measure.
It's true, and yet we as a society, we still search for this concept of justice, trying to hold people accountable while also recognizing, the complexities of human behavior and the potential for someone to change.
It's a tricky balance,
It
and
is.
it often leads to these really intense debates.
Yeah, for sure.
In Diane O'Dell's case, I think the sentence tries to find that middle ground. It acknowledges how serious the crimes were, but it also leaves open the possibility of her, maybe one day, rejoining society.
That brings up another question, though. What's the purpose of punishment? Is it about revenge? Or is it to deter others? Or maybe to help someone rehabilitate?
That's a fundamental question about our whole criminal justice system.
Right.
And I'd say the answer probably depends on the specifics of each case. With Diane O'Dell, it seems like the focus is on both punishment and rehabilitation. She'll spend a significant amount of time behind bars, but there's that chance for parole down the line.
It all comes back to that initial question, though. What is justice in a case like this? I mean, is life in prison enough? Or does the fact that, she lived with those bodies for years, does that change things?
There's no simple answer, and I think it's something we all have to wrestle with on our own. We have to weigh the facts of the case against our personal beliefs about punishment, rehabilitation, and really what justice means to us.
It's heavy stuff, for sure, and I think it's something our listeners will be thinking about long after they finish this episode.
I think so too.
We've explored so much the legal aspects, the psychology, the ethical dilemmas, but at the end of the day, that question of justice, it remains. It makes you think. It makes you re-examine your own values.
That's what these cases do, I think.
Yeah.
They force us to confront some really difficult truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
This has been such a thought-provoking deep dive. Thank you for helping us navigate such a tough but important conversation.
It's been my pleasure. And to everyone listening, I encourage you to keep digging into this case to read those full articles in your deep dive packet.
Yeah, definitely check those out.
There's always more to learn, more to uncover.
And as you keep exploring, ask yourselves, what does justice look like to you? What can we do, both individually and as a society, to prevent tragedies like this from happening?
It's a question worth our attention, worth thinking about deeply, and ultimately worth taking action on.
Until next time, everyone, keep diving deep, keep asking those tough questions, and keep searching for the truth wherever it leads.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And that's a wrap. 2023.